The docking clamps took hold of the blind meridian with the sound of a jaw snapping shut. Danny Voss felt it through the floor, up through his boots, into the bones of his ankles. Korath 9, Veshin way station, smelled like ozone and something sweet he couldn't name, leaking in through the atmospheric seal before the filters caught up. He was elbow-deep in a medical kit when Pete Grady's voice came through the intercom. Flat, unimpressed, the way Pete said everything. 2 passengers boarding, 12-cycle run to Odessa, paid in full. Don't ask questions. Danny didn't ask questions. That was one of the reasons Pete kept him around. He closed the kit, wiped his hands on his pants, and pulled up the passenger brief on the wall screen. 2 Veshin nationals. 1 adult female, 4th caste diplomatic designation. 1 minor child, age designation roughly equivalent to a human 4-year-old. No luggage manifest, no special requests filed. A Veshin with a child, out in the open, on a human freight ship. Danny had worked alien transports for 3 years. He'd carried Rethki traders who slept in gel. He'd carried Ulani pilgrims who sang for 9 hours straight, in a frequency that made the lights flicker. He'd never carried a Veshin child. Nobody had. Veshin children lived in sealed cray ships, hidden from the galaxy like state secrets wrapped in eggshell. You didn't see them. You didn't talk about them. You definitely didn't put them on a cargo frigate with a 5-person human crew and a recycled air system that tasted like old pennies. Something was wrong here. Danny knew it the way he knew a wound was infected before the scans confirmed it. A feeling in the meat of things. He didn't mention this to anyone. He went to prep the passenger cabin instead. Humidity. He cranked it to 78%, which was low for Veshin comfort, but safe for the child's respiratory system, which would be less developed. Atmospheric mix. He added a 0.3 increase in nitrogen saturation. Food stores. He cross-referenced the Veshin Protein Compatibility Index, flagged 2 items that could cause a histamine cascade in a juvenile, and pulled them from the rotation. He replaced them with a neutral starch compound that tasted like wet cardboard to humans, but was apparently acceptable to Veshin palates. It took him 40 minutes. Nobody asked him to do any of it. Lena Marsh found him adjusting the cabin thermostat for the 3rd time. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a protein bar halfway to her mouth. You know they're just passengers, right? Not patients. Passengers with a different respiratory baseline and a developing immune system. Right. You're doing that thing again. What thing? The thing where you care too much and pretend you're being clinical about it. Danny adjusted the thermostat 1 more degree and didn't answer. They came aboard an hour later. Selara Veth was 8 feet of silver-plated chitin. Her exoskeleton caught the corridor lights and threw them back in fragments, like sun on broken glass. Beneath the plates, bioluminescent vessels pulsed in slow rhythm, blues and greens, the baseline Veshin calm spectrum. Her eyes were black from edge to edge. No whites, no iris, just depth. She moved through the airlock with the precision of someone who had been trained to enter rooms and command them. Diplomat, 4th caste. Danny could see it in the way she held her shoulders, high, locked, like armor that happened to be made of posture. Nuck came behind her, translucent skin, stretched over a frame that seemed too delicate for the universe it had been born into. 6 fingers on each hand, all of them moving, touching the wall, the doorframe, the edge of a cargo strap. Chirping, a high, rapid, pulsing sound that the universal translator tried to process, and then gave up on, tagging it as non-linguistic vocalization, exploratory. Nuck was not afraid. Nuck was fascinated by everything. The bolts in the floor, the way the lights buzzed, the texture of human-manufactured steel under 6 alien fingertips. Danny stood at the end of the corridor and watched them approach. He kept his hands at his sides, open, visible. He'd read enough to know that Veshan mothers could perceive threat posture in species they'd never encountered before. Something about micro-muscle tension in the hands. So he kept his loose, kept his breathing even. "Cabin 4, he said. "I've adjusted the environment to Veshan juvenile standard. If anything needs changing, the panel's on the left wall." Saylara looked at him. The black eyes moved across his face with the slow thoroughness of someone reading a document. Then, past him, to the cabin. She walked inside. Check the humidity readout. Check the atmospheric mix. Check the food stores. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Danny recognized the inspection for what it was. The same thing he'd done. A perimeter sweep disguised as settling in. He left them alone. 2 hours later, Lena's voice came through the comm, pitched in the specific register that meant she was annoyed, but also slightly impressed. "Danny, your small alien passenger is in the engine bay." He found Nuck, crouched beside the reactor coolant pipes, chirping at them in a rising pattern, call and response, as if the low hum of the pipes were answering back. Danny knelt 3 feet away, close enough to reach, far enough to not crowd. He held out his hand, palm up, and waited. Nuck's black eyes, smaller versions of Saylara's, rounder, still carrying the soft geometry of youth, locked onto his hand. 6 fingers reached out, stopped, pulled back, reached again. Danny didn't move, didn't coax, just held still and let the child decide. Nuck grabbed his index finger. One quick grip, tight, then released. Danny scooped the child up at arm's length. No chest contact, no cradling, nothing that could be read as claiming, and carried Nuck back to cabin 4. He set the child down at the threshold and nodded once to Saylara, who stood inside like a statue carved from mercury. Her bioluminescence shifted, the blue-green calm spectrum broke, and for a half-second, something else bled through. A color Danny had never seen on a Veshan. Not in briefings, not in xenobiology texts, not in 3 years of alien transport work. Something between deep amber and the color of alien flame you see just before it dies, warm and strange and impossible to name. It was there for a breath. Then, gone. Danny walked back to the medbay. Pete was waiting, leaning against the counter with his arms folded and his face arranged in the expression he used when he was about to say something Danny didn't want to hear. "Keep your distance with those two." "I'm just doing my job." "I know what you're doing. That's why I'm telling you to keep distance." Danny opened the medical kit he'd already organized and began organizing it again. "I will," he said. Pete watched him for a long moment, then left without another word. He'd been a captain long enough to know what a lie sounded like when the person telling it didn't know it was a lie yet. In cabin 4, Nuck pressed 6 fingers against the wall and chirped at the metal until the vibrations hummed back. 4 cycles into transit, the blind meridian fell out of slipstream like a body dropped from a height. Danny was in the mess hall, eating a protein brick that tasted like salted regret, when the ship screamed. Not an alarm. The hull itself, metal bending in directions metal was not designed to bend, a deep groaning wail that traveled through the table, through his hands, into his teeth. The lights died, came back red, emergency spectrum. He was on his feet before the protein brick hit the floor. His body understood emergencies, the way a pianist's hands understand keys, without consultation, without the slow bureaucracy of conscious thought. 3 years of freight work hadn't killed that reflex. Nothing had. Nothing probably ever would. Pete's voice on the intercom, calm as a man ordering coffee. "Portside stabilizer array has gone critical. All crew to damage stations. We are not in immediate danger of hull breach." Probably. The ship bucked again. Cargo containers in the lower hold broke loose from their mad clamps and began their slow, grinding migration across the floor. Danny heard them through the deck plates, the deep scrape of something heavy finding a new home. He grabbed the corridor rail and moved toward the passenger cabins. Standard protocol. Check on non-crew first. Cabin 4's door was jammed. Not locked. Jammed. A structural support had buckled across the frame, pinning it at an angle. Danny pressed the emergency release. Nothing. He hit it again. The door shuddered open 8 inches, enough to see inside. Saylara was on the floor. A ceiling beam had come down across her midsection, not crushing, but pinning her flat against the deck. Her chitin plates had absorbed the impact. She was alive, conscious. Her claws dug into the floor on either side of the beam, straining, but the angle was wrong. She couldn't get leverage. Her bioluminescence was going wild. Colors Danny had no names for, cycling fast, a living alarm system broadcasting in a language his eyes couldn't read. She made a sound, low, vibrating. The universal translator stuttered, failed, reset, failed again. It tagged the output as pre-linguistic vocalization, distress, maternal. Then it added a note Danny had never seen the system generate before. No human equivalent exists. Danny understood it anyway. It was a mother calling for her child. "Where's Nuck?" he said through the gap in the door. Saylara's black eyes locked onto his. She pointed, one claw, extended, aimed down the corridor, towards Section 7. The decompression alarm hit at that exact moment. Section 7, atmosphere venting. Danny ran. He didn't radio Pete. Didn't radio Lena. The biolocator on his wrist showed one small Veshan signature in Corridor 7, and the oxygen readout for that corridor was dropping like a stone thrown off a building. He had time to call for help, or he had time to get there. Not both. Corridor 7 was already cold when he reached it. The air tasted thin, metallic, wrong. An outer hull patch had failed. Not blown, just failed. The seal degrading under the structural stress, letting the void sip at the atmosphere one molecule at a time, fast enough to kill, slow enough to be cruel about it. Nook was behind a bulkhead seal, curled tight, 6 fingers wrapped around drawn-up knees, chirping in a frequency Danny had never heard before, rapid, stuttering, climbing. The translator tagged it, and this time it found a word: fear. The child's translucent skin had gone pale, almost clear. Danny could see the network of bioluminescent vessels underneath, pulsing fast, too fast, the rhythm of a system burning through its reserves to keep the body running while the air disappeared around it. Danny checked the corridor seal controls. Manual lockdown was possible, but would take 2 minutes to pressurize. He didn't have 2 minutes. He checked for emergency suits. One human-rated suit in the wall panel. Nothing for a Veshan child. The suit wouldn't fit. The breathing mix wouldn't match. 90 seconds of air. Maybe less. He pulled off his jacket, wrapped Nuck in it. The child was lighter than he expected, hollow-boned, like a bird built from glass and stubbornness. He pressed Nuck against his chest, one arm locked around the bundle, and felt 6 small fingers grip the front of his shirt with a strength that didn't match the small body it came from. He hit the manual pressure lock on the maintenance alcove. A space designed for storing pipe fittings and cable spools, not people. 3 feet by 4 feet, airtight. He shouldn't have known the emergency seal code. It was an engineer-level override. But Danny knew a lot of things his official file said he shouldn't. And the ship didn't ask for credentials, just the code. He sealed them in. Dark, tight. The sound of his own breathing and Nuck's chirping, slower now, steadier, responding to the warmth and pressure of being held. The alcove had its own oxygen reserve, small, designed for one human, not calibrated for a Veshan respiratory system, but enough. Enough to keep them both on the right side of alive until someone found them. Danny's vision went gray at the edges. Hypoxia. The oxygen was splitting itself between two sets of lungs, and neither was getting a full share. He focused on keeping his breathing shallow, keeping his grip steady, keeping the jacket tight around the child pressed to his chest. Nuck's chirping faded to a low, rhythmic pulse. Not fear anymore, something else. Something the translator would probably have called comfort if the translator had been anywhere nearby, which it wasn't. Danny's last conscious thought was not noble. It was not heroic. It was a small, private, almost embarrassed observation that the child smelled like copper and rain, and that it was a good smell, and that he hoped someone would find them before the good smell became the last thing he ever noticed. He woke up in the medbay. The lights were white again, standard spectrum. The ship had stabilized. He could feel it in the hum of the engines, the even thrum of a vessel no longer trying to tear itself apart. Lena's voice somewhere nearby, reading off damage reports in the clipped tone of someone who had been awake for too many hours and was holding herself together through sheer administrative spite. There was a weight on his chest. Nuck, asleep, still in Danny's jacket, which was now wrinkled and damp with something that was probably Veshan sweat, but might have been bioluminescent fluid. The child's skin was faintly glowing, a soft amber pulse in time with small sleeping breaths. 6 fingers twisted into the fabric of Danny's shirt, directly over his heart, gripping, not letting go, not in sleep, not in safety, not at all. Danny stared at the ceiling. He didn't move, didn't try to shift the child. His right arm was numb from the position, and something in his ribs ached in the specific way that meant bruised, not broken. He breathed. The ship breathed around them both. Saylara appeared in the doorway. She had freed herself, or been freed. The beam was gone. Her chitin plates showed stress marks, but no fractures. She stood at full height, 8 feet of silver and light, and looked at the scene on the medbay bed with eyes that held no expression a human face could mimic. She crossed the room, each step deliberate. She stopped beside the bed and looked down at her child, asleep on a human's chest, wrapped in a human's jacket, fingers anchored in human fabric. She raised one hand, long, clawed, capable of tearing through hull plating if the stories were true. She placed it on Danny's forehead, gently, the way you touch something you've decided to keep. Danny's eyes were open. He looked up at her. He didn't understand the gesture. He felt it, though. The weight of it, the intention behind it, something that traveled through the point of contact, like a current with no name. She held it for 3 seconds, then withdrew, then sat in the chair beside the bed, folded her long legs beneath her, and stayed. On the bridge, Lena pulled up a Veshan cultural database and began searching. It took her 20 minutes to find what she was looking for. She read it twice. She read it 3 times. She closed the file and sat very still for a long time, staring at the navigation console without seeing it. "Pete," she said. "Yeah," Pete said. "We have a problem," she said. Pete looked at her face and didn't ask what kind. He'd been a captain long enough to know that the worst problems were the ones that made your navigator go quiet. Lena called the meeting in the mess hall because it was the only room on the blind meridian with a door that locked from the inside, and a table big enough for all 3 of them to sit at without touching elbows. Pete took the chair closest to the wall. Danny took the one closest to the door. Lena remained standing, which was how Danny knew this was going to be bad. She had a data pad. She placed it face down on the table, which was worse than showing them whatever was on it. "The gesture Saylara performed on Danny in the medbay has a name," she said. "It's called Cathara Saloon." "Sounds pretty," Pete said. "It's not pretty. It's a binding designation. In Vishan law, and when I say law, I mean law that predates their spacefaring civilization by about 6,000 years. Cathara Solon translates roughly to, I mark you as the shield of my blood. It is a formal, public, irrevocable declaration that the person who receives it has proven themselves worthy of standing between a Vishen child and anything that might harm them. Danny sat very still. He was aware of his hands on the table, the way the recycled air tasted in the back of his throat, the faint hum of the ship's core 3 decks below. It is not marriage, Lena continued. It is not adoption. It is something humans don't have a word for. The closest I can get is a permanent recognition of protector status, earned through action, not requested, not negotiated. It outranks military alliances. It outranks caste assignments. A 4th caste Veshan diplomat has just elevated a human cargo medic to a status that most Veshan males spend decades competing for and almost never achieve. Pete leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked. The ship hummed. Nobody spoke for a while. "What happens when we reach Odessi?" Pete asked. "Veshan authorities will be aware of it. The bonding generates a biosignature change in both parties, something in the pheromonal spectrum. Veshan sensors will pick it up the moment we dock. If Danny rejects the bond, it's a diplomatic incident with a species that has 14 warships within 2 slipstream jumps of every major human trade route. If Danny accepts, he's bound to a Veshan family under a legal framework that humanity has barely studied and does not fully understand." "Great," Pete said. "Those are great options, Lena. Thank you." Danny hadn't moved. His eyes were fixed on a scratch in the table surface, a thin, pale line in the metal where something sharp had been dragged across it once, probably years ago, probably by accident. He traced it with his gaze from one end to the other and back again. "Danny," Pete said. "Yeah. You're doing that thing where you stare at furniture instead of having feelings." "I'm processing." "Process out loud." Danny leaned back, looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was gray and unremarkable, and had never bonded him to an alien family through an ancient ritual he hadn't consented to. So it was currently his favorite thing on the ship. "She shouldn't have done it," he said. "She's a Veshan mother who watched a stranger nearly die saving her child. I think by her math, she absolutely should have done it. Her math is wrong." Pete watched him. The scratch on the table continued to exist, unbothered by any of this. "I'm not," Danny started, stopped, started again. "I am the last person who should be trusted with this." There it was, the thing under the thing. Lena glanced at Pete. Pete's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A door opening onto a room he'd been in before and didn't enjoy visiting. "She didn't ask for your service record, Danny." "She should have. She watched what you did, not what you've done." Danny's jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek flexed, once, twice, then went still. He stood up, and the chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a small, metallic argument. "I need air. We're on a spaceship. Then I need less of whatever this is." He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Lena looked at Pete. "How much do you know about his discharge?" Pete picked up the datapad, turned it over, and began reading the Veshan legal text. "Enough," he said. "Nothing else." Danny went to the observation bay, because it was the farthest point from the passenger cabins, and because space, for all its emptiness, had never asked him to be responsible for anything. He stood at the glass and watched the stars do their ancient, indifferent work, and tried very hard to think about nothing at all. He failed, because Nuck was there. Not in the observation bay. In the corridor outside it. Then at the doorway. Then 3 feet behind Danny, chirping softly. The low exploratory frequency, the one that meant curiosity rather than distress. Danny didn't turn around. "You're supposed to be with your mother." Nuck chirped again, moved closer. Danny heard the soft tap of 6-fingered hands on the metal floor. He looked down. A bolt, small, hexagonal, pulled from some panel Nook had pried open with those impossible fingers. The child had placed it carefully against Danny's left boot, and was now sitting back on thin haunches, looking up at him with black, round, expectant eyes. Danny picked up the bolt, looked at it, looked at Nook. "Thank you?" Nook chirped, a bright ascending note, and scuttled away. Danny heard the small footsteps recede down the corridor. 3 minutes later, Nook was back, this time with a food wrapper, folded into a triangle with unsettling precision. Danny took it. "Thanks." Nook left, returned, a piece of wire, twisted into a shape that resembled either a star or a spider, or a deeply abstract portrait of Pete Grady having a bad day. Danny held all three objects and felt something crack behind his sternum. Not pain, something worse than pain. The feeling of being chosen by something small and sincere, when you have spent years building a wall specifically designed to prevent that from happening. He sat down on the floor. Nook sat down across from him. The child chirped. Danny didn't understand the words, but understood the tone, the unshakable confidence of a 4-year-old who has decided that this person belongs to them, and sees no reason to question the decision. Lena found it later in the Veshan developmental database. Provision rituals. When a Veshan child identifies a protector, they bring offerings, small objects, food, materials, a demonstration of reciprocity. The child saying, "You gave me safety. I give you this bolt I found near the engine. We are even now. You are mine." She didn't tell Danny. She added it to her incident file and moved on. 2 days passed. Nook's orbit around Danny tightened. Not clinging, the child never grabbed, never cried, never demanded. In the medbay when Danny worked. In the corridor when Danny walked. Sitting outside the mess hall when Danny ate. Chirping at the door like it was a conversation partner who happened to be made of steel. Saylara watched all of this. She watched it the way she'd watched Danny adjust her cabin's humidity on the first day, with the careful, unblinking attention of someone who had been assessing the world for threats her entire life, and had just found something that didn't register as one. On the 11th cycle, she came to the medbay. Danny was cataloging supplies. He heard her before he saw her. The soft click of chitin on deck plating, the particular rhythm of a Veshan stride. He turned. She stood in the doorway, full height, 8 feet of silver. The bioluminescent vessels along her arms pulsed in a color he'd only seen once before, the day in the medbay when she touched his forehead. Amber and flame light. Warm. Strange. The translator hummed, ready to process. She held up one hand, and the translator went silent. She had turned it off. When she spoke, it was in English, broken, rough. Each word placed with the care of someone handling something fragile they had built themselves from stolen parts. She had been learning. In her cabin, in the dark hours, she had been studying his language, like a weapon she needed to wield precisely once. She said 4 words. "You did not hesitate." Danny looked at her. The medbay was quiet. The ship hummed. Nook was somewhere nearby. He could hear the chirping, faint, content, the sound of a child who had decided the universe was an acceptable place as long as certain people remained in it. He opened his mouth to say something. It didn't matter, because Saylara turned and left, and the 4 words stayed in the room like smoke, filling every corner, settling into the metal, and the recycled air, and the marrow of his bones. She hadn't said thank you. She hadn't said, "I trust you." She had said something harder and sharper and truer than either. She had told him why. And Danny stood in the medbay holding a box of sterile bandages, and understood, with the sick, dropping certainty of a man watching the ground rush up to meet him, that he could not outrun this. That the wall he'd built, the clinical distance, the careful numbness, the 2-year project of making himself into someone who didn't get attached to anything, had just been walked through by a 4-year-old with 6 fingers, and a mother who spoke 4 words of English, like they were a door she was kicking open. He put the bandages down. He sat on the edge of the medbay bed. He pressed his hands against his face. In the corridor, Nuck chirped at a pipe fitting, and the pipe fitting hummed back. A deci filled the observation bay window like a bruise. Gray-green, swirled with cloud systems the color of old copper, rotating with the slow patience of a world that had been a junction point between civilizations for longer than most civilizations had existed. Danny stood at the glass and watched it grow and felt nothing that he could put a name to. 3 Veshan warships were already in orbit. Lena saw them first on the scanner. She said, "Oh," in a very small voice, which was how Danny knew the ships were very large. Lena only got quiet when the math was bad enough to stop being numbers and start being a situation. Pete came to the bridge and looked at the scanner display for a long time. He poured himself a cup of the coffee-adjacent substance the ship's galley produced and drank half of it before speaking. "Those aren't escort ships." "No," Lena said. "Those are interception class." "Yes." Pete drank the rest of his coffee, set the cup down, looked at Danny, who was standing in the bridge doorway with Nuck perched on his left forearm like a strange, translucent bird. "Danny, why are there 3 Veshan warships waiting for your passenger?" Danny looked at Nuck. Nuck looked at Danny. Nuck chirped once, brightly, and offered Danny a piece of wire that had been twisted into a new shape. Something that might have been a ship, or a fish, or a symbol for an emotion the Veshan language could express, but English couldn't. "I think," Danny said, "that Saylara hasn't been entirely honest about this trip. She told them in the mess hall. Not all of it. Enough." Her English had improved in 12 cycles, sharpened by whatever desperate engine drove her to learn. She spoke in short sentences, each one built and placed like a brick. Where English failed her, she switched to Veshan, and Lena's datapad translated with a 3-second delay that made the conversation feel like it was happening underwater. Nuck's father had been a high-caste military commander, 2nd caste, a ranking that meant power and influence, and a name that carried weight across Veshan-controlled systems. He was dead. The manner of his death was something Saylara described in a single Veshan word that the translator processed for 8 seconds before producing. Erased. The Veshan ruling council had decided that the commander's death was politically inconvenient. His house was disgraced. Not destroyed, that would create martyrs. Disgraced. Quietly unmade. And the child of a disgraced house, under Veshan law, could be remanded to state creche care, stripped of lineage, raised without a name, without a caste, without a mother. Saylara's voice did not shake when she said this. Her bioluminescence went flat. No color, no pulse. A deliberate shutdown, like someone turning off every light in a house before the storm hits. She had taken Nuck and run. Every way station had reported her position. Every port had forwarded her biosignature to Veshan tracking systems. The blind meridian was not a transport. It was the last ship willing to take her, and Adesi was the last junction before human-controlled space, where Veshan authority thinned to almost nothing. Almost, not completely. Pete leaned forward. The warships. "They are here for Nuck," Saylara said. "They will board, they will take." "Can they?" "They have authority." "On a human ship?" Saylara looked at him with those endless black eyes, and Pete understood the look, even without the translator. Authority was not about jurisdiction. Authority was about 3 warships and a freight vessel, with no weapons, and a crew of 5. "The bond," Lena said. She had her datapad out, scrolling through legal text fast enough that her thumb was a blur. "The Kethara Solon. If it's recognized, if it's been witnessed and recorded, the Veshan delegation can't take Nuck without addressing it first. Their own law, pre-spacefaring, sacred custom. To ignore it would undermine the entire caste legitimacy structure." Would they ignore it? For a human, they'd want to. But doing it publicly, with witnesses, on a junction world with 40 species watching? Lena shook her head. It would cost them more than one child is worth. Danny was looking at Nuck, who was sitting on the table arranging wire shapes in a pattern that might have been a map, or a game, or a prayer. Danny, you understand what happens if you stand on that bond. I stand between them and the kid. You stand between 3 warships and their legal claim to a child. So I stand between them and the kid. Pete closed his eyes, opened them, nodded once. Then he stood up and went to the communications array, and for the next 40 minutes, he did something Danny had never seen him do. He called in favors, old ones, from people who owed him things that couldn't be measured in currency. He transmitted the bonding record, the biosignature data, the timestamp, Lena's documentation, to every diplomatic channel within range. Human, Veshan, Rethke, Ulani, neutral, hostile, everyone. By the time the Veshan delegation boarded, half the junction knew what had happened on the blind meridian. The story was already beyond anyone's ability to quietly erase. They came through the airlock in formal armor. 3 of them, tall, taller than Saylara, broader, first-caste military bearing in every step. Their chitin was darker, almost black, polished to a mirror finish. The bioluminescence beneath was red, a steady, unwavering crimson that the translator flagged as authority display, dominant spectrum. They filled the corridor the way a flood fills a basement, completely, without apology. The lead delegate spoke to Saylara in formal caste language, high register, cold, words that fell like gavels. Danny didn't need the translator to understand the tone. He'd heard it before. In discharge hearings, in courtrooms, in every room where someone with power explained to someone without it why the rules existed and why they would not be bent. Saylara stood rigid. Her bioluminescence was still flat, dead. She answered in the same register, and her voice was steady, and her words were correct, and none of it mattered. Danny could see it in the angle of the lead delegate's shoulders. The decision had been made before they boarded. This was ceremony, performance. The outcome was already written. The lead delegate turned toward cabin 4, where Nuck was sleeping. Danny stepped into the corridor. He didn't block it, he just stood in it. Hands at his sides, open, the same way he'd stood when Saylara and Nuck first came aboard. Visible, unthreatening, and absolutely not moving. The lead delegate looked down at him. The height difference was almost comic. Danny's head reached the middle of the Veshan's chestplate. The red bioluminescence pulsed once, brighter, and the translator caught a burst of subvocal communication between the 3 delegates, fast, layered, too complex to fully render. The summary tag read, confusion, reassessment. You are the bonded one, the lead delegate said. The translator made it flat, neutral, but something in the original Veshan carried a weight the English couldn't hold. Not a question, a measurement. I am, Danny said. You are human. Yes. You have no caste, no lineage, no standing in our law. I have Cathara Soloon. The silence after that sentence lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Danny watched the lead delegate's red bioluminescence flicker. Just once. A stutter in the authority display. The equivalent, perhaps, of a judge's hand pausing over a gavel. Because Danny was right, and everyone in the corridor knew it. Cathara Soloon was older than the caste system. Older than the military hierarchy. Older than the council that had sent these 3 armored delegates to collect a child from a freight ship. It was bedrock law, the kind that couldn't be overruled without cracking the foundation of everything built on top of it. They could take Nuke. They had the firepower, the jurisdiction, the political will. But they could not take Nuke from a Cathara Soloon bondholder without publicly declaring that their most sacred custom was worth less than political convenience. and Pete had made sure that every diplomatic frequency within range was listening. The lead delegate looked at Danny for a long time. Danny looked back. He was aware of his own heartbeat, the sweat on his palms, the particular flavor of fear that tasted like copper and adrenaline. He was also aware that he was not going to move. Because Nuck was sleeping in the room behind him, and the math was simple, and the body had decided before the brain could complicate things. The delegate spoke, low, directed at Danny alone. The translator rendered it clean and cold. You have made yourself a target, small creature. The council does not forget. What you have claimed, you must now carry. And it is heavier than you know. Danny's voice came out steady, not loud, not defiant. Just a man telling the truth as he understood it. I've carried heavy things before. The three delegates turned. They walked back through the airlock. The docking clamps released 16 minutes later. The warships held position for 2 hours, close enough that their scanner shadows darkened the blind Meridian's hull. Then they slipped into stream, one by one, and the stars reappeared where they had been. Lena filed 11 reports in 90 minutes and ate 4 protein bars. Pete sat on the bridge and stared at the navigation console and said nothing for a very long time. In cabin 4, Nuck woke up, chirped once, and reached for the wire shapes on the bedside shelf. The child selected one, the shape that might have been a ship or a fish, and held it against the wall, pressing it flat, as if trying to make the metal remember its outline. Danny stood in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed and his hands shaking. Not from fear, from the thing that comes after fear, when the body realizes it survived something it was not designed to survive, and every muscle tries to let go at once. Celara's hand found his shoulder. He felt the weight of it, chitin and warmth, and the specific pressure of someone saying, I know, without words. She stood beside him. She did not let go until his hands were still. 3 days out from Odessi, the blind Meridian crossed into human-administered space, and the universe did the thing it always does after the extraordinary. It returned to being ordinary. The engines hummed their usual hum. The air tasted like the same recycled nothing it had always tasted like. Lena's damage reports grew shorter. Pete's silences grew longer, but in the comfortable direction. The kind of quiet that meant a man was thinking about fuel costs and docking fees, rather than warships and ancient alien law. Danny woke at the start of the 7th shift, swung his legs off the medbay cot he'd never stopped sleeping on, even though there were empty crew bunks, and found a small pile of objects on the floor beside his boots. 2 bolts, a food wrapper folded into a perfect hexagon, a piece of copper wiring bent into something that was either a circle or an attempt at the letter D, and a sliver of hull plating, no bigger than a thumbnail, polished smooth on one side. Nuck's overnight offerings, the provision ritual continuing in the dark hours, the child creeping through the ship while the crew slept to leave proof of a bond that needed no proof. Danny collected them. He'd started keeping them in the chest pocket of his jacket, the same jacket he'd wrapped around Nuck in Corridor 7, still carrying a faint stain of bioluminescent fluid that no amount of washing could remove. The pocket was getting full. He would carry bolts and wire and folded wrappers until the jacket fell apart, and then he would find another pocket. He found Pete in the mess hall, staring into a cup of the brown liquid the galley insisted was coffee, with the expression of a man negotiating a peace treaty with his own digestive system. "Morning," Danny said. "Sit down." Danny sat. "You know," Pete said, "when I hired you, Lena told me I was making a mistake. Said you had the look of someone who was going to be either the best crew member I ever had or the most expensive problem. Told her it could be both." "Was she right?" "About which part?" "Either." Pete drank his coffee, made a face, drank more. 3 warships, Danny. I had 3 Veshan warships sitting on my hull, because my medic decided to adopt an alien child through the power of not dying in a closet. I didn't adopt anyone. You did something older and weirder and harder to explain on an insurance form. Pete set the cup down. How are you doing? Danny looked at the table. The scratch was still there. The thin, pale line he'd traced during Lena's briefing about Cathara Solon. It was becoming a familiar landmark, a fixed point in a geography that kept shifting under his feet. I don't know, he said, and meant it, which was, in its own way, progress. A month ago, he would have said, fine, and meant nothing at all. Pete nodded, didn't push, stood up, rinsed his cup, and paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, he said, I've watched you for 3 years, Danny. You check the oxygen levels for passengers who don't ask. You adjust the temperature for species you've never met. You ran into a decompressing corridor for a child that isn't yours, and didn't radio for help because the Max said there wasn't time. He turned. Whatever happened before I knew you, but what I've seen, she wasn't wrong to choose you. And if you need someone to say that out loud, consider it said. He left. Danny sat with the words like a man sitting with a sunrise, unable to look directly at it, unable to look away. The observation bay had become a place, not officially, not by any designation in Lena's meticulous ship logs, but it had become the place where Danny and Nuck existed together in the particular silence of 2 creatures who had decided, without discussion, that proximity was enough. Danny sat on the floor with his back against the bulkhead. Nuck sat across from him, close enough that their knees almost touched. Between them, arranged in careful rows on the cold metal deck, were bolts, dozens of them, different sizes, different metals, pulled from panels and storage bins across the ship. Nuck was sorting them by some criteria Danny couldn't identify, not size, not material, not shape. Some Veshan organizational principle that existed in a part of the brain humans didn't have. That one goes there? Danny pointed. Nuck chirped, moved the bolt, looked up for approval. Good, sure, that looks right. It didn't look right. It looked like chaos arranged by a very small alien with strong opinions. But Nuck's chirp in response was warm and bright. The ascending note that Danny had learned meant satisfaction, and that was enough to make the arrangement perfect. Danny picked up a bolt, placed it next to one of Nuck's rows. Nuck studied it, studied him, moved the bolt 2 inches to the left, chirped once. The correction was gentle but firm. Danny had been wrong, and the child was patient about it. Copy that, Danny said. 2 inches left, got it. He remembered a game. Something old, something from before, a hand game, clapping patterns, rhythm, call and response. His father had taught it to him in a kitchen in a house that didn't exist anymore, on a morning that lived now only in the muscle memory of his palms. He held up his hands, flat, open. Nuck's black eyes tracked them. Danny clapped once, held his hands out, waited. Nuck tilted that translucent head, 6 fingers spread wide. The child reached out and pressed both palms against Danny's. A mirror, not a clap, but close, close enough. A first attempt at a game, invented on a different world by a species Nuck had known for 12 cycles and trusted completely. Danny clapped again. This time, Nuck clapped back, not quite in sync. The 6 fingers made a different sound against each other, lighter, sharper, like rain on a tin roof. But the rhythm was there, the intent was there. They tried again, closer, closer still. On the 4th try, Nuck matched the rhythm perfectly and chirped so loud that the sound bounced off the observation bay glass and came back doubled. Danny laughed. It came out of him like something escaping, A short, rough, startled sound, as if his body had forgotten it could make that noise and was alarmed to rediscover the capability. Not smooth, not warm. A laugh with rust on it, unused muscles firing after a long dormancy. Nuck froze, stared, then chirped in the exact same rhythm as the laugh. A Veshan echo, a child's ear catching a new sound and holding it up to the light. Danny laughed again, this time on purpose, and it hurt less. Saylara stood behind them, not in the doorway, further back in the corridor, where she could see without being part of the scene. Danny didn't know how long she'd been there. He didn't turn around. He could feel her, the way he could feel the ship's gravity, a constant, a presence, a thing that held the other things in place. Her bioluminescence was steady, the amber color, the warm one, the one that had appeared first in the medbay and had never fully left since. It pulsed in slow, even intervals, the Veshan calm spectrum, but deeper, richer, carrying a frequency Lena had spent 2 days trying to classify, before giving up and labeling it unrecorded, possibly unique. It was not unique. It was simply rare, a color that appeared when a Veshan mother was in the presence of safety, real safety, not the temporary kind that came from locked doors and distance, but the kind that came from watching someone teach her child a hand game on the floor of a freight ship, and laugh like he'd forgotten he could. Danny's hand rested on the observation glass. Flat. Open. The stars behind it were doing what stars always did, burning and dying and being born in the permanent, unhurried rhythm of things that did not care about Veshan law, or human guilt, or the small, enormous fact of 2 people on a cold floor, playing a game with bolts and borrowed time. Nuke reached up, 6 fingers pressed against the glass beside Danny's hand. Not on top of it, not holding it, just beside it, matching. A child's hand and a man's hand, separated by an inch of empty air, reflected in the window against a background of everything. Lena found the color's meaning 3 days later. She was deep in a Veshan emotional chromatics archive that required 2 translation layers and a cultural context module she had to build herself from scattered academic texts. She found it buried in a subsection on pair bonding displays, cross-referenced with a chapter on crest ship rituals she hadn't thought to check. She read the entry, read it again, closed the file, leaned back in her chair, and pressed her fingers against her eyes. She did not add it to the incident report. She did not tell Danny. She did not tell Pete. Some information was not data. Some information was a window into a room you had no right to enter, and the decent thing to do was walk past. On the bridge, Pete was running course calculations for their next pickup. Standard freight, 2 containers of industrial solvents, and a crate of agricultural sensors, bound for a colony world Danny couldn't pronounce. The kind of job that paid the fuel bills and kept the blind meridian in the sky. "Lena," Pete said, "what's our fuel margin for the Kessler run?" "Thin. We'll need to top up at waypoint 6. And check the atmospheric filters. We've been running heavy on humidity since Koreth and I want to make sure we're not burning through replacement packs. The humidity is for the passengers." "The passengers are staying." Lena looked at him. Pete looked at his navigation console. The question had been rhetorical. They both knew it. Saylara and Nook had no destination filed, no outbound ticket, no place left to go that wasn't the place they were already in. The blind meridian had become the thing it had never been designed to be. Not a transport, but a home. The kind of home that moves, that hums, that smells like recycled air and old coffee, and carries its people through the dark between the stars, because the dark is easier when the hull holds more than cargo. Pete entered the course heading. Lena filed the fuel request. The ship turned, gently, toward the next job. In the observation bay, Danny's hand rested on the glass. Nuck's fingers pressed beside it. Saylara stood behind them both, amber light pulsing in the slow rhythm of a heart that had decided, after a long and difficult calculation, to keep beating. The stars burned. The ship hummed. The child chirped once, softly, at nothing and everything, and the metal walls hummed back.